Hello friends, welcome back to another video. It's a bookish one and it's the end of our fall 2024 content for the season, for the year, and it's a little bit sad. November is quickly ending and the holidays are here, and I am slowly getting into the holiday spirit, but still clinging on to these last autumnal moments, and thought I would give you guys a review video of all the books on my fall reading list. Did I read them all? What did I think? Do I recommend? Etc, etc. So grab a cozy beverage, blanket, seat, and let's dive in because I have a pile of books. Like I said, I have a mountain of books. I think I have 14 books, 12 books. There's 12 physical books and two books I don't physically have. So yes, 14 books from this season, which is a lot. I got a lot of reading done this season. In general, this year I've read a lot more than I have at least last year, which is an interesting observation for me to report on as I reflect on this past year. So let's dive in. I'm gonna go in order of the order I read them. I have to like reach into the back of my memories to kind of remember some of these books because I started reading these in September, so couple months ago. The first one is A Poem for Every Autumn Day, edited by Allie, Esiri. So this is a collection of poems, autumnal poems, and there's actually a couple poems for each day. So the thing is, you pull this out on whatever day it is, you open up to the day, and you have a poem that has been selected by our editor. I did not read every single poem in here, but I was able to grab this on slower days, slower mornings before work or on the weekend when I just had a little more space and time for myself. And those were very, very sweet moments that I have cherished this past fall time, and I'm excited to have this out next year and make it just like a fall tradition to use. The other thing I did like about this book is that the editor included kind of like an annotated summary about the poem to give us a little bit of a history lesson and context for the poems, because they span from modern to, you know, classics and historical things. So I enjoy it and recommend it. There's also a poem for every like winter day, probably spring and summer days, and I kind of want the winter one now. I feel like having a daily poem during the winter would be just a nice way, again, to slow down and cherish the present, and winter is tough, so I think having a daily poem can also brighten your spirits when you're feeling a little bit blue. I'm not gonna rate this. I don't know, like, I feel like rating a poem book is kind of weird, but I do recommend it if you want to read this next year or just pick it up anyway. All right, moving into my next book, which was Cold Clay by Juneau Black. This is book 2 of the Shady Hollow mysteries, and I read the first one last year and really, really loved that one. This one I enjoyed. I did not love it as much as the first one, and I think there's different factors that go into that. Obviously, I was familiar with the setting and the characters and just the overall vibe. I guess each new book in the series kind of just focuses on like one big mystery, and our main character, Vera Vixen, the fox, takes on the case. So in book 2, we are introduced to a new villager, essentially, to this Shady Hollow town that they all live in, and I think that's fun. Like, if they continue adding in like new characters or new people that move into the village in each book, that will keep me like reading these. And I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars. For my rating scale, like a 3 means I enjoyed it, I liked it, but I didn't love it. 4 is I love it, and a 5-star means I really, really loved it. Perfect. Still thinking about it, made me cry, just a lot of emotions. So the next book that I read was a cozy mystery, In the Company of Witches by Auralee Wallace, and I read a lot of witchy books this season, and I think that's just going to be a continuing phase for me. In the past, I've tried to read different genres, like mix it up with like horror and witchy and fantasy and whatever else, sci-fi, and I always just, I think witchy, cozy fantasy mystery books are my lane when it comes to full-time reading, and this was part of a duology that I definitely want to read the second book in this series. I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars, and I think that's just because cozy mysteries, I like them. It would take a lot to impress me and make me really love a cozy mystery, and I think that's just like the genre itself. But for a cozy mystery, this was really good. I love the writing and the setting and the characters, and the mystery itself was fun. I don't really remember exactly the details of what happened. I don't think I knew like who did it. I'm kind of dumb when it comes to mysteries, and that might just be because of my, I don't know, my brain's not clicking things together. But I think that's fun to kind of, you know, not expect things and just go in with low stakes. So I think expectations have a lot to do with how we rate our books. But yes, definitely want to read the second one and recommend it. Continuing with our witchy book, The Book of Magic by Alice Hoffman. So this was book 4 in the Practical Magic series. It's the conclusion, it's the final one, and I loved it. I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. I guess this would be one of my favorite books that I've read this entire year, probably my favorite based on the rating system and what's to come in terms of holiday books. So this might win like my book of the year. And the reason being because it did so well to tie the other books in the series together. Of the other 3 books, I really enjoyed the first book. I think just Practical Magic in itself. The second book, where it takes place in New York City, I think was my least favorite one. And then the third book I read, where it goes back to like 1600s and we see the origin of the Owens family. I think that was maybe my second favorite one. So this would be my first favorite. That one would be my second favorite. The first installment would be my third. And then the second book, or the New York City one, would be my last one if I'm kind of tier ranking them. But yes, I just love the setting and Alice Hoffman's writing. It's very atmospheric and ethereal, and it just makes me like pause, and I really pay attention and savor the pages because I want to like read and gobble up all of the writing, because it just makes me just feel the feels of the season. And that's why I love Alice Hoffman's books in this series. And I know she has a lot of other books that are outside of the series that I'm going to be delving into, and just curious to kind of see what her other books are like. So loved this, highly recommend it if you haven't read any of the books in the series, or if you're trying to find a witchy magical realism book. Check it out. Rewitched by Lucy Jane Wood was a new release this season, and I gave this a 4 out of 4. I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. Loved it. Just wasn't like amazing, and I love the cover. And this is just a cute book to have like out every season too. But I really loved the story and the characters. It was cute, it was charming, a little bit quirky, and just kind of the perfect like witchy, autumnal, like feel-good, heartwarming read to read during this time of the year. It is on par with The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sangu Mandana, and I think that's just kind of carved into a little genre of like cozy witchy fantasy that I am like here for, and just want to read all those kinds of books. And I love that this book followed a burned out witch like trying to find herself, so there was a lot of just kind of like themes of growth and self-discovery and believing in yourself, and I just love all of those elements. So I think just swirled up into one book, it just really drove things home for me, and I really enjoyed it. Spellshop by Sarah Beth Durst. I gave this also a 4 out of 5 stars. This was another new release, kind of marketed as like a low stakes cozy fantasy, and I will say it felt like a mix of Legends and Lattes by Travis Balgieri and The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches, and like Rewitched, and that kind of like cozy elemental magical realism thing. But this I would say was a little bit more high fantasy than the cozy witchy like books that I've already read. Like it was definitely not like what you think of with high fantasy, but it did have a little world and like magic system and like different kinds of characters and creatures, and I love that the main character's like best friend was a talking plant. I feel like that just really brought the book together, and I think it's so funny. This is like nominated for Goodreads like best romantasy of the year category, which I did not see coming. I would have thought it would be in like the fantasy category, but they're pushing it as like a romantasy, which I don't know. I don't align with that. I did vote for it though, because I think it was the only romantasy I read. Actually, no, I voted for an Ink A Fate Inked in Blood by Daniel Jensen, because that actually was a romantasy to me, and I really enjoyed that book, set aside from this talk. But yeah, I feel like things I didn't like about this book was like the romance. Like, it was definitely a slow burn, like not a lot of romance going on, which I enjoy. Like, I don't hate that, but I think just the way the characters were developed and their like story, it was just kind of meh. And there was like another character introduced later on in the story, like that made sense in terms of like the plot and like the overall storyline, but the dynamic of the characters and like it being that character coming in so late just felt kind of awkward and weird for me, and not like, didn't really like add more to it for me. But like overall I really enjoyed it and recommend it if you're looking for like getting into the cozy fantasy genre. But it was definitely like more developed, more character development, more world building than Legends and Lattes when I read that book, which was like my first cozy fantasy like of this kind of low stakes genre. I really enjoyed it, but I wanted more out of it in terms of like character and plot and world, which this like gave me. So it is possible to have those things in a book. So I recommend checking this out. I love the purple pages. Okay, the next book I don't have a physical copy of, but we'll pop it up here because it belongs to my friend Amanda, who came down to visit, and I speed read the book while she was here before she took it back. But it is The Dark Between the Trees by Fiona Barnett, which was a historical folk horror book. The plot summary sounded really interesting. It has a dual like timeline, a past and present timeline. It has like women like historians, scholars. It jumps back to like 17th century England, and there's the haunted woods, and like all the like factors of it was really fun and interesting to me. But just the way the book carried out, the execution of it, I just was very uncomfortable reading it and just wanted it to end. Had trouble like reading it as well, which might have been like the writing style as like on top of things. Like I came out of this book thinking like maybe I just don't like horror books. Like the author did a really good job of creating a suspenseful like atmosphere, and I would have rather watched this book as a movie. Like I feel like that could be something fun to explore, and then I would watch that. But as a book, I don't know, because in the fall time I've learned that I don't necessarily want to read scary horror suspense books. I want to read more atmospheric, witchy, cozy books that just make me like feel like warm inside. And if I want to get horror, I will watch a horror movie. I gave it a 2.5 stars. It did get a 0.5 increase from the 2-star. So a 2-star for me means I didn't like it, but I'm still trying to like objectively like give it some kind of points like on certain things, if that makes any sense. So it's definitely a 2-star read, but I did give it a 0.5 based on kind of the things I thought were positive, but maybe I just don't like those elements, like the horror and the suspense things. The next book I enjoyed much, much more, and I read it right after I finished that one, and that is The Haunting of Aveline Jones by Phil Hickes, which is a middle grade book, and I really loved it. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. It was really cute and creepy. Like there were some creepy elements and parts of this story for being for kids. Like I feel like I would be creeped out as a kid, because I was creeped out like as a 30-year-old woman. The whole story between Aveline and like her backstory and her friendships, it was just so fun, so cute, low stakes. And I think coming out of the other book, going into this, it was going to be an automatic high rating for me anyway. And there's a second book that I want to read next year, which is I can't read it, The Bewitching of Aveline Jones. So I'm probably gonna read that next year, but super cute, super fun, very in line with the season. Highly recommend. Okay, moving back into cozy mysteries. I originally picked this book up, Now You See It by Carol J. Perry. I got it at a bookstore randomly because I loved the cover. Once I bought it and started reading it, I realized it's part of a whole series, The Witch City Mysteries, and this author has written tons of books. I mean, has like a decade career at this point. So me being stubborn and like wanting to read things in like chronological order, I was like, because this is like book 9 or book 13. This is like way down the line. So I was just curious about the first book because I did start reading this. I think I got like 40 pages in, and I could just tell they were like referencing things that were probably mentioned in at least the first book and then probably later ones. So I went on Libby and found that the audiobook for the first book in the series, which is Caught Dead-Handed was available, so I just checked it out and just started like binge listening to it. And I finished it, I think, in like 2 days. Like I listened to a good chunk of it at work while I was like doing processing in the archives. Got what I wanted in terms of like getting the like backstory and the setting and the origin of our main character and like how she ended up kind of like in this setting. So I technically read Caught Dead-Handed first, and that book, that was a trip. That was an emotional trip because it's not even that old. It's like 10 years old. It was published in 2014, and there are a lot of problematic elements in there, like in terms of cultural things and how the author refers to people such as the Romani people, constantly using derogatory terminology in 2014, which like if it was 2004, okay, like pass, but like 2014 is when like at that point we should be transitioning into like respecting other cultures. And it wasn't just like one-off thing where like somebody was called a derogatory term, it was like fleshed into the plot. Our main character like works at a TV station, and in the first book she basically takes over this fortune teller segment. No, she wasn't a fortune teller. The phone a psychic things like we all grew up with, like seeing in like the 90s and 2000s. So you could call in, pay for like a minute, and like the person would, you know, tell you your future or whatever. So she had to like take over for somebody who was killed in that, and like she took on this whole like brand identity as a Romani person, and that was just totally fleshed into the entire story, which just rubbed me the wrong way. But I finished the book. Then I was like really curious if she was going to improve upon how she addresses different cultures. Then I read this one right after that, or finished this, and it was a little bit better, because this was published last year, 2023. But there were still some questionable things about people of color in here and like domesticity that I can see people having problems with. And this woman, I mean, she's probably like in her 60s or 70s now. She's a white woman, you know, it makes sense, but like, why do I like this kind of stuff? I like reading it and critiquing it, so here we are. I don't think I'm gonna read any more books from this person ever again. I am gonna steer clear of Carol J. Perry for previous said reasons. I definitely liked this book better in terms of just like objective rating. So I gave this a 3 stars, and I gave Caught Dead-Handed 2 stars, although maybe it deserves less than 2 stars. One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. I was really excited to read this because I saw other like booktubers reading this and the second book, so it's a duology, book 1 and 2 series, and it was getting high ratings from people. I'm always on the lookout for like a good fantasy that has a romance element, dare I say romantasy, and just seeing like what I think of books that are popular. So I was excited to read this because it was getting hype and the plot seemed really interesting, and then I read it. My expectations were lower because my friend Amanda read this before me and told me that it was young adult, like it read very YA, and I think it's not marketed as YA, but it's tagged as YA on Goodreads now. I don't know, feel free to correct me down below if you know more about that, but I feel like if I went into this thinking it was going to be like a straight like adult fantasy, I would have been severely disappointed. But I did go in knowing it was going to be more young adult, and having that allowed me to enjoy it better, and I did give it a 4 out of 5 stars. I liked the magic system. Like there's a deck of cards, like tarot cards, that are like, it's like the core of this whole like plot and like magic system, which I thought was a really cool idea. It could have been fleshed out like way more, like if this was more of an adult fantasy and was longer and there was more time to like build out the world and the system and the characters, like it would have just been. As per usual, my camera died because I hit the like time limit on my camera, and I was in the middle of explaining this, and I don't know if I just continued rambling while my camera like stopped filming and then it eventually shut off. So I'm gonna do my best to piece together where I left off, because I don't know, I really don't know, but I think I left off like how I enjoyed the like tarot card element in this. But I feel like if it was a longer book, more of like an adult fantasy, that it would have been executed so much better. And I think just in general, if this was more of a adult fantasy, it would have been a great book for me at least. But I think it is a great introduction if you're new to fantasy or you just enjoy YA, or a new adult, which apparently is a emerging or newer kind of genre that's in between young adult and like adult fantasy. I don't know, let me know down in the comments if you guys know the difference between all of these different genres, because I'm just kind of navigating it, because I love just adult fantasy, and that's kind of been my standard going into like all fantasy books, and that's when disappointment has set in, because I've read young adult fantasy, romantasy, and it's just not my favorite cup of tea. Like I'll drink it, I'll indulge a little, but I'm gonna have thoughts, I'm gonna have critiques, and I'm not gonna be feeling too happy at the end of it. But there is a second book, Two Twisted Crowns, and I'm planning to read that next year, maybe in January, just because I want to find out what happens. That's why this book ultimately did get a 4-star out of me, because I think the ending redeemed it for me. Like, the first 200 some pages was a little bit of a slog for me, and I was just like, okay, like, where is this going? And then we finally got hit with some action at the end, where it really, at least for me, felt like it was tying together. And then we got a little bit of a twist, a little bit of surprise at the end with a major cliffhanger, like obviously setting up for the next book, which is why I like immediately wanted to start the second one, but I was like, I gotta pace myself. Being a mood reader, I don't want to like dive straight into another book, like another book in the series, just because I want to like balance it out a little bit. But I will be reading that soon. We'll see. Some people have said the second book's better, which does make sense in a lot of series, because the first one in a series is usually setting up the world and the plot and the characters, and then by book 2 you're just kind of like in the setting and it's all just like stories. So we shall see. 3 more books, friends. Times Convert by Deborah Harkness, book 4 of the All Souls series. This is definitely my least favorite one of the series so far. I got a 3 stars out of me. I liked it just because I love the whole world and the story and the series, but this one in particular was kind of like it was a prequel, I think, technically, and it followed one of the characters, not one of the main characters, but definitely like a higher up character on the scale of different characters, because there's a slew of different witches, vampires, demons, and just humans in this whole world, which this is why I love this whole series, and I feel like I've been talking your guys' ear off about it. But this one followed one of the vampires, like what his life was like before he became a vampire. So we go back to the revolutionary times in America, and he was living in Massachusetts and was enlisted as a soldier. That part I really enjoyed. And one of the previous books, I think book 2 in this series, there's time traveling, so like our main characters like go back to Elizabethan England, and that's actually part of the story, like they're traveling, which I really loved. In this, it was more of time jumping and different POVs in the different chapters, so there was no actual going back in time in this book. And I think if that was like roped into the story more, I would have loved it so much more, would have added so much more. Like I feel like Harkness took the lazy route by just like switching characters and switching timelines with each chapter, and that's probably why I didn't love it as much, because I expect much more out of you, Deborah. But no, I still enjoyed it, and there's still one more book left after this series that I'm excited to read next year, and do recommend it. And no, I have not watched the television series yet. I'm a little bit scared. I feel like it's gonna ruin the books for me, and I'm stubborn. And some of you guys have said that the show is different than the books, which makes me a little bit more motivated to watch it. But again, I don't want like TV producers' ideas of what the characters are like in my brain, and that's why it's hard for me to like watch that show. The Teller of Small Fortunes by Julie Long. I love cozy fantasy, and this is definitely one of my favorite like new cozy fantasies on the scene of the genre. First of all, I love the cover. I love the whole premise that this is a traveling fortune teller, and what was really interesting to me is that the author, who is Chinese Malaysian, really roped in like dual identities of being like too Asian, or like too, like in our times it'd be too American or too kind of like Western, but in this story it was more played into a fantasy, so she made up kind of like ethnic groups, but I could tell it was like Chinese, Malaysian, like background, which I really loved. And I loved the main character because there were instances in the book that I connected with, being a mixed race human, that, you know, she has struggled with being like feeling accepted. And in the book she like leaves her hometown, which feels like China or more of an Asian centric culture, and she goes into a new world which feels more Western, more like European. The fantasy in here, again, it's not high fantasy, it's definitely lower stakes fantasy, and going in with my like knowing that my expectations were lower, that's I think why I enjoyed this more. But again, the whole idea, if it was more of a high fantasy and like turned into a series with more like time spent on the characters in the world and like the plot, it's a great idea, it's a great premise, it could like be so much more, but it's also working as a cozy like low stakes fantasy. And it was rather quick read as well, I think at around 300 pages, so a great introduction if you're trying to get into fantasy. This one also felt like a mix of the Spellshop and Legends and Lattes, although definitely like better than Legends and Lattes in terms of the characters and the world and like the plot. Although this seemed like kind of like they were just on quests, like side quests, just continuing through this world. Like it was hard to pick out like what period of fantasy time that they were in. Like it seemed like the author picked different elements of historical times, and the writing didn't really reflect that either. Like the dialogue seemed, it was like a mix. Like there was times where I felt like the dialogue made sense, that it felt like old or like medieval, but then there was times where it was more modern, contemporary like slang, so it went back and forth. But I did feel like I was in a little Renaissance world, medieval world, playing a video game or something, and I have my tunic on and I'm traveling in my little caravan. And the elements in this book are really cute, about like tropes of found family and like making friends, believing in yourself and all of that. I feel like it was just very heartwarming, a sweet, cozy book, and 4 out of 5 stars. I don't know if I told you guys my rating, but highly recommend. Whew. All right, last book, guys. The Love Elixir of Augusta Stern by Linda Cohen Loyman. I almost didn't read this book, and of course, and it's the last book that I just finished it yesterday. It was very quick to read. It's about 300 pages, which is kind of a good sweet spot for me in terms of books that I want to like read a little bit quicker. This is a historical fiction, romance, magical realism. Like that's at least the tags on Goodreads, and I think it was marketed as historical fiction, and I got this through Book of the Month. We have a dual timeline. We have 1920s New York, Brooklyn specifically, and then we have the late 1980s, like 87, 88, and that's because Augusta Stern, our main character, grew up in the 20s, and she was learning to be a pharmacist, and eventually became like one of the first female pharmacists like in America. And then we have present day, the 1980s, when she's like just turning 80. So there's themes of like long lost love. Augusta like spent 62 years wondering if this man loved her. So there's the romance element, and then there's the magical realism element, which was very, very, very thin. Not very overt at all, because Augusta learns to make elixirs and homeopathic treatments from her aunt Esther. So it brought in a little bit of like Jewish folklore medicine, which was really interesting. You had the New York element, the early kind of like pioneering of being a female pharmacist. The 1980s like POV is, it's taking place in an old folks home, which had a lot of drama, a lot of like quirky drama, and I was laughing, like I was LOLing at some of the scenes. But it was kind of like weird. Like you have the 1920s historical fiction, which I'm all about. Like if it was just all straight 1920s, I probably would have loved this a lot more. But when it flips to the 1980s and we see Augusta older, like I like that kind of flipping, but I needed more out of, I think, Augusta as a character, and like the writing and the whole just execution of it. So that's why this got a 3 out of 5 stars from me. I enjoyed it, I liked it, but it didn't make me feel anything. Like I feel like this type of book, if it was done better or more aligned with my emotions, it would have made me cry. I was just trying so much to like feel something and cry, but the characters just weren't like taking it to the next level for me, but it was fun, lighthearted themes of women pioneering and lost love, second chance romance, things like that. And then I read the author's note, and I respected the book a lot more after I read the author's note because Augusta Stern is based on a real person. The author's husband's great-grandmother was like the first female pharmacist. It's really interesting, like the history of it. So then I was like, you know, that kind of makes sense. The book was a little bit boring, and you know, when you're reading history, like true, like factual history, it's a little bit boring. So then it kind of made sense that it's based on a true story because the author tried to keep a lot of the story and the elements true to, like, you know, her husband's great-grandmother's story. And she did a lot of other research too, and like lists sources that she used for learning about like Jewish folklore and things like that. Like early, how pharmacies ran in New York in the early 1920s. And obviously like women were not welcome or accepted in that sphere, or career, like women choosing their career over a family is another kind of theme explored in this. So it has a lot of interesting historical themes that I really like. Like I love reading stories that explore those different things, which is why I love historical fiction. But it also threw in romance and magical realism, which I love that stuff too, but it was fun. It was okay. All right, friends. Oh God. We've had a lot of book spillage today. I was trying to film a reel, and this is a lot of books to hold all at once. So here are all the books that I read this fall season. Many I liked, a few I loved, a few I did not like. I'm gonna miss fall time reading, but you know, we're going in the holiday mode. 'Tis the season, and we must, I guess, assimilate into what society wants from us, even though I will be a fall girly all year round at heart. So friends, let me know what books you've read this season that were your favorite or stood out to you, or what you're currently reading, and all that fun stuff, because I love to hear from you, as always. And yeah, after this, it's holiday content, so get excited, get excited. I guess I'll say it here, I am doing Vlogmas. You're hearing it first. I am doing Vlogmas this year. It'll be my fourth year. Well, I've been doing Vlogmas every year since I started YouTube in 2020, and it's just a fun little tradition for me, and I know you guys really enjoy it, and it's just fun to romanticize the Christmas time and film it and document it for you guys. So get excited for that, and I guess you'll be seeing me very soon again as we dive into December and Christmas and holiday stuff. So cheers to that, cheers to you, and I will see you in the next one.